The meeting of two worlds. Tivari stood tall in the grand diplomatic chamber, her golden armor shining under the soft glow of the floating crystal lights. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained calm, collected. As the princess of the Zeltharian Empire, she had been trained since childhood to control her emotions. No fear, no hesitation, no weakness. But today, for the first time, she felt uncertain. Across the hall, standing near the massive entrance doors, was a human. Captain Ethan Cole. The Human Alliance had sent him as their representative for the peace talks between their species. Tivari had read about humans, studied their history, their strategies, their unpredictable nature. But nothing had prepared her for this moment, standing face to face with one. Ethan was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the confidence of a soldier who had seen many battles. Unlike the Zeltharians, who preferred elegance in their movements, humans seemed more relaxed, more casual. His dark combat uniform was simple, functional. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, sharp and alert, as if always ready for danger. For a moment, there was silence. Tivari spoke first, her voice steady. "Captain Ethan Cole, welcome to Zelthar Prime." Ethan gave a small nod, his lips curling into a slight smirk. "Appreciate the welcome, Princess." His tone was respectful, yet there was something in his voice, something unshaken, like he wasn't intimidated by the grand empire around him. Tivari studied him carefully. Humans were known for their boldness, their strange humor, and their unpredictable behavior. She had expected him to show fear, hesitation, but he stood like a warrior who had nothing to lose. The room was filled with high-ranking Zeltharian officials, their sharp eyes watching every movement. At the far end of the hall, a massive round table waited for the negotiations to begin. This treaty could end years of conflict between their people, or it could fail, leading to war. Tivari motioned toward the table. "Shall we begin?" Ethan stepped forward. But before he could speak, a sharp alarm blared through the chamber. The glowing crystal lights flickered, and the entire hall shook with a violent explosion. Guards rushed in, drawing their weapons, forming a protective circle around Tivari. The walls trembled as a second explosion tore through the eastern wing of the palace. Smoke and fire filled the air. Tivari turned swiftly to her chief advisor. "Report." The advisor's voice was tense. "An attack, Princess. Unknown forces have breached the outer gates." Tivari clenched her jaw. This was supposed to be a diplomatic meeting. Who would dare attack now? Before she could react, she felt a strong hand grab her arm. Instinctively, she spun, her reflexes sharp, her blade half-drawn, only to see Ethan pulling her toward cover. "No time for politics, Princess. We need to move," he shouted over the alarms. For a brief moment, she hesitated. No one had ever dared touch a Zeltharian royal so casually, let alone give her orders. But there was no time to argue. The attack was too precise, too well-timed. As they ran, blasts of energy bolts struck the walls, barely missing them. Tivari's guards engaged the attackers. Figures in dark armor, their faces hidden beneath red masks. Tivari's mind raced. Who were these assassins? Why now? She and Ethan took cover behind a large pillar. "Stay behind me," she commanded. Ethan let out a small laugh, pulling out his own weapon. "You sure? Last I checked, humans are pretty good at surviving." Tivari narrowed her eyes. "This is my planet, my battle. Then let's win it together." A masked assassin charged toward them, weapon raised. Tivari moved first, her blade slicing through the air in a flash of gold. The attacker crashed to the ground, motionless. Ethan fired his energy pistol, taking down another enemy in one precise shot. "Nice work, Princess." More enemies poured into the chamber. It was clear now. This was no random attack. Someone had planned this. Someone wanted the peace talks to fail. Tivari and Ethan fought side by side, the air filled with the hum of energy weapons and the clash of metal. Despite being from different worlds, Their movements were in sync, covering each other's backs, surviving together. But the attackers kept coming. They were outnumbered. The palace was falling into chaos. Thari turned to Ethan, breathing hard. "We need to escape. There is a hidden tunnel beneath the western corridor." Ethan nodded. "Lead the way." As they ran toward the exit, Tavari realized something. For years, she had been told that humans were dangerous, reckless, and untrustworthy. But right now, the only person she could trust was Captain Ethan Cole. A desperate escape. The walls of the grand chamber trembled as another explosion roared through the palace. Smoke filled the air, turning the once pristine hall into a battlefield. Tivari's sharp eyes scanned the room. Her royal guards were outnumbered, locked in brutal combat with the masked attackers. The heavy scent of burning metal and energy discharge filled the air. She needed to get out. Ethan crouched beside her, his weapon raised. His breathing was steady, his eyes sharp, a soldier in his element. "Princess," he said, voice calm despite the chaos, "if you've got an exit plan, now would be a great time." Tivari's mind raced. She knew the palace better than anyone. There was only one safe route left. "Follow me," she ordered, gripping her blade tightly. They moved quickly, staying low, weaving between fallen pillars and scattered debris. The western corridor was just ahead, but the moment they reached the entrance, 3 masked figures stepped into their path. Ethan reacted first. With a precise shot, he took down the nearest enemy, but the other 2 were fast. One lunged at him, forcing him into hand-to-hand combat, while the other turned on Tavari. The assassin swung a plasma dagger at her throat, but she sidestepped, her golden armor flashing as she countered. Their blades clashed, sparks flying with every strike. Tavari was a warrior, trained since childhood. She would not fall so easily. With a swift movement, she twisted, bringing her knee into the assassin's ribs. He staggered back, and in one final strike, she drove her blade through his chest. She turned just in time to see Ethan slam his opponent against the wall. The human fought differently than her people, raw, instinctive, unpredictable. There was no rhythm to his movements, no calculated precision, but it worked. The assassin crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Ethan wiped the blood from his lip. "Nice work, princess. Remind me not to get on your bad side." Tavari ignored the comment. "We must move." They pushed forward, entering the narrow tunnel hidden behind a large tapestry. The moment they stepped inside, the heavy doors sealed behind them, blocking out the sounds of battle. Darkness. Silence. Only the distant echoes of chaos remained. Tavari activated a small crystal embedded in her armor, casting a dim glow along the tunnel walls. The underground passage stretched ahead, a secret route used only by the royal family in times of crisis. Ethan exhaled. "All right, where does this lead?" "To the outer perimeter of the palace," she said. "If we reach the emergency hangar, we can escape." Ethan nodded. "Good plan. Let's keep moving." But before they could take another step, a low growl echoed through the tunnel. Tavari froze. Ethan tensed, gripping his weapon. What was that? Then, from the shadows, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared. The creature stepped forward, tall, covered in dark, plated armor, its clawed hands dripping with venom. It was a Vorax hunter, a bioengineered assassin, one of the most feared killers in the galaxy. Ethan muttered under his breath. "Great. A monster. Just what we needed." Tavari's pulse quickened. These creatures are bred for one purpose: elimination. The Vorax let out a guttural snarl before lunging forward. Ethan fired first. His energy blast struck the creature's chest, but the armor absorbed most of the impact. The beast barely slowed. Tavari dodged left, rolling under a swing of its massive claws. Ethan dove the other way, barely avoiding a strike that sent sparks flying as claws scraped against the tunnel wall. "Aim for the joints," Tavari called. "The armor is weakest there." Ethan adjusted his aim and fired at its knee. The shot connected, and the creature stumbled, roaring in pain. Tavari seized the moment. With lightning-fast reflexes, she leaped onto the creature's back, her blade flashing as she plunged it deep into the exposed joint between its shoulder plates. The Vorax howled, thrashing violently. It slammed against the tunnel walls, trying to shake her off. Ethan saw his chance. He drew a combat knife from his belt, primitive by Zeltharian standards, but deadly in skilled hands. With one swift motion, he drove the blade into the creature's neck. The Vorax let out a final guttural growl before collapsing. For a moment, silence. Then Ethan let out a breath. "You really know how to pick an escape route, Princess." Tavari straightened, brushing dust from her armor. "We are not safe yet. We must keep moving." They pressed forward, the tunnel sloping downward. The further they went, the more Tavari's mind raced. The timing of the attack was too perfect. Someone wanted the peace talks to fail. And worse, someone had known about this secret escape tunnel. The realization sent a chill down her spine. They were being hunted. As they neared the exit, Tavari reached for her communicator. "Commander Jour, do you copy?" Static. No response. Ethan frowned. "That's not good." Tavari clenched her jaw. "We are running out of time. If we do not escape soon, we may not escape at all." Ethan gave her a small grin, tightening his grip on his weapon. "Then let's make sure we do." With that, they stepped into the night, into the unknown. Secrets of the battlefield. The cold night air hit them as Tavari and Ethan emerged from the hidden tunnel. Above, the sky was streaked with smoke, the aftermath of the attack still visible in the distance. Fires raged across the palace grounds, and the distant echoes of sirens and battle filled the air. Tavari's mind was still racing. This was no random attack. It was too well planned, too precise. Someone had betrayed her, someone who knew the palace's secrets, including the hidden escape tunnels. Ethan scanned their surroundings. They had exited near the edge of the royal district, where the grand towers of the palace ended, giving way to rocky terrain. Beyond the cliffs, deep forests stretched into the horizon. "We need to keep moving," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "If they knew about that tunnel, they'll have scouts looking for us." Tavari nodded, gripping her blade. "The emergency hangar is 2 kilometers north. We can secure a transport there. 2 kilometers through open terrain with assassins on our trail." Ethan smirked. "Sounds fun." Tavari ignored the sarcasm and moved forward, keeping her steps light and precise. She had trained for survival situations, but this was different. She was not alone. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if that made things easier or more complicated. They had barely covered a few hundred meters when a faint hum filled the air. Tavari's heart clenched. Drones. Ethan heard it too. "We've got company." They sprinted toward a nearby rocky outcrop, ducking beneath jagged formations as 3 black, insect-like drones hovered overhead. Their red scanning lights flickered across the landscape, sweeping for any sign of movement. Tavari pressed herself against the cold stone, barely daring to breathe. Ethan studied the drones carefully. "They're using heat signatures." Tavari nodded. "We need to mask ours." Ethan pulled a small, circular device from his belt. He pressed a button, and the device emitted a faint, shimmering field that spread over them. Tavari raised a brow. "Human stealth technology." Ethan grinned. "We're full of surprises." The drones hovered for a moment longer then, without detecting them, whirred away into the distance. Tavari exhaled, but the relief was short-lived. If drones were scanning, then ground forces weren't far behind. They had to move. Fast. A test of survival. They pushed forward, moving swiftly through the uneven terrain. The rocky path soon gave way to dense vegetation, the forest stretching before them like a vast, green ocean. The moment they stepped inside, the air changed. It was thicker, alive, buzzing with unseen energy. Tevari knew this place. The Ghostwood Forest. "Stay close," she warned. "This forest is ancient and dangerous." Ethan glanced at the towering trees. Their massive roots twisted like veins, their thick canopies blocking most of the starlight. A faint mist curled around the ground, giving the forest an eerie, almost breathing presence. "Define dangerous," he muttered. Tevari didn't answer. Some things were better left unspoken. They moved carefully, keeping their weapons ready. Every step they took, the ground seemed to shift beneath them, the forest whispering in an ancient language only it understood. Then, without warning, the ground gave way beneath Ethan. A sinkhole. He fell fast, disappearing into the darkness below. "Ethan." Tevari lunged, grabbing his arm at the last second. Her fingers barely held onto his wrist, the weight of his body pulling against her. Below, the pit was deep, its jagged edges glistening with moisture. "I'm fine," Ethan said through gritted teeth, "but I'd rather not die like this." Tevari's muscles strained as she pulled him up. Humans were heavier than they looked. With a final effort, she dragged him onto solid ground. Ethan lay there for a moment, catching his breath. "That was fun. Let's not do it again." Tevari simply shook her head and kept moving. Humans. Unseen eyes. Unspoken truths. As they moved deeper into the forest, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The shadows shifted, and distant rustling echoed around them. Ethan tensed. "We're not alone, are we?" Tevari unsheathed her blade. "No." Then, a sudden blur of movement. Before they could react, figures dropped from the trees, silent as ghosts. Zeltharians. But not just any Zeltharians, warriors clad in dark cloaks, their faces hidden behind ceremonial masks. The Nightborn. Tevari's blood ran cold. The Nightborn were an elite faction of assassins, loyal only to the highest bidder. If they were here, then someone had gone to great lengths to ensure she did not leave this forest alive. Ethan raised his weapon, but before he could fire, one of the assassins vanished into the mist, then reappeared behind him, blade at his throat. Tevari barely had time to react before another whirled toward her, striking fast. She blocked instinctively, steel meeting steel. The battle began. The Nightborn moved like shadows, their attacks swift and calculated. Tevari fought with everything she had, her blade a blur of silver against the darkness. Ethan, despite being outmatched in speed, held his own, his human instincts keeping him unpredictable. But there were too many of them. Tevari felt a sharp sting at her side, a blade slicing through her armor. She gasped, stumbling back. Ethan roared in fury, tackling the assassin to the ground. He fought brutally, his movements raw and forceful. He didn't fight like the Nightborn. He fought like a human, with sheer will and relentless aggression. But then, a voice echoed through the trees. "Enough." The assassins stopped instantly, withdrawing their blades. A tall figure emerged from the shadows. Unlike the others, he wore no mask. His sharp, silver eyes locked onto Tevari. She knew him. Commander Kaler, her father's most trusted general. Her breath caught in her throat. "You?" Kaler's gaze was cold. "You are a traitor to the Empire, princess, and you will answer for it." Ethan tensed beside her. "I don't like the sound of that." Tevari clenched her fists. The attack. The betrayal. Now this. It all made sense now. Her own people had set her up, and they weren't here to capture her. They were here to eliminate her. The betrayal within. Tevari's breath came fast, her heart pounding against her ribcage. The dark forest felt smaller now, closing in as Commander Kaler stepped forward, his piercing silver eyes cold and unyielding. The Nightborn warriors stood motionless, their curved blades still gleaming with the blood of the battle. "You were never meant to leave that palace alive, princess," Kaler said, his voice sharp, cutting through the thick mist. Tevari felt the sting of his words, but she refused to let it show. She straightened, keeping her shoulders high despite the wound on her side, despite the exhaustion clawing at her muscles. "You have no authority to accuse me." Kaler's expression didn't change. "I serve the Empire, and I carry out the will of the throne. You, on the other hand." His gaze flickered toward Ethan. "You run with the enemy. A human." Ethan, still breathing hard from the fight, exhaled sharply. "All right, let's clear a few things up. First of all, I didn't ask to be here. Second, your assassins attacked first. And third," he looked at Tivari, then back at Kaler, "I'm getting really tired of people trying to kill us." Kaler ignored him. He took another step closer to Tivari. "You broke protocol. You defied tradition. And worse, you let a human protect you." His voice was dripping with disgust. "That alone proves your weakness." Tivari's fists clenched. "I am not weak." Kaler's eyes narrowed. "Then why did I find you running?" The accusation burned. She wasn't running. She was surviving. Fighting for something bigger than herself. Fighting for the very future of her people. But Kaler wasn't here to listen. He was here to enter. Tivari's mind worked fast. She knew Kaler's reputation. Ruthless, disciplined, loyal to the Empire to a fault. He wouldn't kill her outright, not yet. He would take her back, broken, defeated, to stand trial before the High Council. They would strip her of her title, brand her a traitor, and ensure that peace with the humans would never happen. She wouldn't let that happen. "And what of the attack on the palace?" she asked, voice sharp. "Surely you don't believe that was mere coincidence?" Kaler's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "He knows." Tivari pressed forward. "You knew about it. You let it happen. And now you're here to clean up the mess." Kaler exhaled, almost in amusement. "You think you know the full picture, Princess, but you do not. The Council will decide your fate. Not me." He raised his hand. The Nightborn warriors closed in. Tivari's muscles tensed. She needed a plan. Now. Ethan moved first. Faster than any of them expected, he grabbed a flash grenade from his belt and slammed it onto the ground. A blinding white light exploded through the trees. The Nightborn recoiled, momentarily stunned. Kaler cursed, shielding his eyes. Tivari didn't waste a second. She grabbed Ethan's arm, and they ran. The hunt begins. The forest blurred past them as they sprinted through the thick underbrush. Every step was a battle against the burning pain in Tivari's side, but she refused to slow down. Ethan was right beside her, his breathing steady, his movements quick despite the uneven terrain. He was trained for this, for running, for surviving. Behind them, Kaler's voice rang through the trees. "Find them. Bring me the princess, dead or alive." The forest came alive with movement. The hunt had begun. Tivari pushed forward, her mind racing. They needed higher ground, somewhere defensible. Then she saw it, a sharp cliff edge leading down into the misty ravine below. "Ethan," she called, "follow me." Ethan's eyes widened. "That's a cliff, Princess." "Exactly." She didn't wait. She ran full speed toward the edge and jumped. For a split second, there was nothing but open air. Then she hit the sloping rock surface and rolled into a controlled descent. Ethan cursed loudly but followed, skidding down after her just as the Nightborn warriors burst through the tree line. Arrows and energy bolts whizzed past them, barely missing as they tumbled into the thick fog below. They hit the bottom hard, rolling onto solid ground. Tivari groaned, pushing herself up. Her body ached, but she was alive. Ethan groaned beside her, staring up at the sky. That was the worst idea ever. It worked. Ethan exhaled. Fair point. But they weren't safe yet. They needed a real plan. Unlikely allies. As they stumbled through the fog-covered valley, Tivari's mind was racing. There had to be someone who could help them. Then she remembered. The resistance. Deep in the wastelands, Far from the Empire's control, there were Zeltharians who had long opposed the Council's rule. Warriors, outcasts, rebels. If anyone would listen, it was them. "We need to keep moving," she said. "There's someone I need to find." Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. "Someone who won't try to kill us." Tavari hesitated. "That remains to be seen." Ethan sighed. "Great. Lead the way." The resistance camp. After hours of trekking through the ravine, they reached it, a hidden camp built into the cliffs, camouflage from aerial scanners. Before they could even get close, they were surrounded. Zeltharian rebels, weapons drawn. Tavari lifted her hands. "I need to speak to your leader." A burly warrior stepped forward, eyes sharp with suspicion. "Why should we trust you, Princess?" Tavari met his gaze, unwavering. "Because the Empire has betrayed me. And if we don't act now, they will destroy everything." The warrior studied her, then glanced at Ethan. "And the human?" Ethan gave his signature smirk. "I'm just here for the ride." The warrior considered for a long moment, then lowered his weapon. "Come." They were led into the heart of the camp. Fires burned low, rebels sharpening weapons, whispering about the princess who had arrived with a human soldier. At the center of the camp, a figure waited. A woman, clad in battle-scarred armor, her violet eyes piercing. "Tavari," she said, her voice laced with both familiarity and distrust. "You bring a human to my camp. You must be desperate." Tavari held her head high, desperate enough to change the future. The woman's gaze lingered on her, then shifted to Ethan. "Then let's see if you're worth saving." Against all odds, Tavari stood in the heart of the rebel camp, her golden armor dimmed by dust and battle, her side aching from the wound she had yet to tend. Around her, Zeltharian rebels eyed her with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. It was not every day that the princess of the Empire walked into a resistance stronghold with a human soldier by her side. The rebel leader, Commander Nyx, crossed her arms, her piercing violet eyes locked onto Tavari. She was taller than most, her battle-scarred armor a testament to her years of survival outside the Empire's control. "You claim the Empire betrayed you," Nyx said, her voice unreadable. "That's a bold statement coming from a princess." Tavari held her ground. "I came here because I need allies. The Empire has already sent assassins after me. If they succeed, they will destroy any chance for peace with the humans. And once that happens, they will turn their sights on you." Nyx studied her carefully. "And why should I believe you?" Before Tavari could answer, Ethan stepped forward. "Because I saw it firsthand," he said, his voice steady. "I was there when they attacked her. This isn't just politics. Someone in the Empire wants war, and they're willing to kill their own to get it." Nyx's gaze flickered between the two of them. Then, with a small smirk, she turned to her soldiers. "Lock them up." Before Tavari could react, the rebels grabbed her arms, shoving her forward. Ethan struggled against them, but there were too many. "What are you doing?" Tavari demanded, twisting against her captors. Nyx's smirk widened. "If you're telling the truth, you won't die in the trials. If you're lying," she shrugged, "we'll know soon enough." Tavari's heart sank. The trials of the wasteland. No one had ever survived them. The trial begins. The next morning, Tavari and Ethan were dragged into an open arena carved into the stone cliffs. The sky above was a dull gray, the air thick with the scent of scorched rock and metal. Rebels crowded the stone ledges, watching in anticipation. Nyx stood above them all, arms crossed as she observed. "Survival in the Empire means nothing out here," she announced, her voice carrying through the canyon. "If you want our help, you fight for it." She pointed to the center of the arena, where two massive iron doors rumbled open. From within, a guttural roar echoed. Tavari clenched her fists as a beast emerged. It was unlike anything she had seen before, a hybrid of steel and flesh, its four muscular limbs covered in thick, armor-like plating. Its mechanical tail hummed with deadly energy, its red eyes glowing with hunger. A war beast, a creation of the Empire. Tivari's pulse quickened. The rebels had captured one of the Empire's bioweapons, and now they were using it against her. Ethan sighed beside her. Great. Another monster. You guys really love throwing these at us. Stay behind me, Tivari said, drawing her blade. Not a chance. Ethan cracked his knuckles. I like my odds. Before they could move, the beast charged. The ground trembled beneath its weight, its massive claws kicking up dust. Tivari dodged left, rolling under its swinging tail, while Ethan dove right, barely missing the sharp edges of its metal plating. The beast slammed into the ground where they had stood, sending a shockwave through the arena. Tivari moved first. She sprinted toward its exposed flank, her blade flashing as she slashed at the gap between its armor plates. Sparks flew, but the blade barely cut through. The beast snarled, twisting faster than she expected. Its massive claw lashed out, catching her side, and sending her flying into the dust. Pain exploded through her ribs. Tivari. Ethan's voice. Through the haze of pain, she saw him charging the beast head-on. His human instincts were different from hers. Where Zeltharians relied on precision and strategy, humans fought with sheer willpower. Ethan jumped onto the beast's back, grabbing onto its mechanical plating. He pulled a small explosive from his belt and jammed it between the armor plates. Boom! The explosion sent the beast stumbling, roaring in pain. Tivari saw her chance. She pushed through the pain, sprinting forward, her blade humming with energy. One strike. One shot. She drove her sword into the exposed flesh beneath the beast's head. The blade pierced deep. The beast let out a final, strangled snarl, then collapsed. The arena fell silent. Dust settled. Blood dripped from Tivari's blade. Then, slowly, the rebels cheered. Tivari turned to Nyx, chest heaving. Is that proof enough? Nyx smirked. Not bad. Princess. Not bad at all. She nodded to her soldiers. Release them. The resistance joins the fight. That night, Tivari and Ethan sat around the central fire, surrounded by rebels who now looked at them with respect instead of suspicion. Nyx sat across from them, sharpening a blade. The Empire wants you dead, she said. That makes you one of us. Tivari studied her carefully. Will you fight with us? Nyx was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. We move at dawn. Tivari exhaled, relief washing over her. They had a fighting chance now. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. So, just to be clear, we survived assassins, drones, a monster, and now we have a bunch of rebels on our side. Tivari gave him a rare, small smile. Yes. Ethan chuckled. I think I'm starting to like your crazy plans. She didn't answer. Because tomorrow they would march toward war. And the real battle had yet to begin. The final stand. The sky was still dark when Tivari stood atop the rocky cliffs, watching the horizon. The first hints of morning painted the clouds in streaks of deep violet and crimson, but the world felt still, too still. Below, the rebel camp bustled with movement. Fighters strapped on armor, weapons hummed as they powered up, and quiet murmurs filled the air. Today was the day. Today, they would march against the Empire. Tivari exhaled slowly. She had spent her entire life preparing to lead, but never like this. A hand touched her shoulder. She turned to see Ethan, his expression softer than usual. You ready for this? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out at the approaching dawn. No one is ever ready for war, she admitted. But we don't have a choice. Ethan nodded. Then we fight. March to battle. By the time the sun broke over the cliffs, the resistance was on the move. Tivari led the charge, riding atop a sleek hover speeder, her golden armor gleaming in the morning light. Ethan sat beside her, rifle across his lap, scanning the horizon for threats. Behind them, hundreds of rebel warriors followed, silent, determined. The plan was simple. Strike first, strike hard. Kaler and the Empire's forces were camped at a nearby stronghold, preparing for a full planetary lockdown. If they succeeded, the rebels, and any hope for peace, would be crushed. Tavari wouldn't let that happen. As they neared the stronghold, she gave the signal. The fleet of speeders fanned out, positioning themselves for the attack. Ethan tightened his grip on his weapon. They're going to see us coming. Tavari smirked. Good. A sudden explosion rocked the landscape. Flashes of blue energy tore through the rebel ranks. The Empire had seen them coming. Tavari barely had time to react before a blast struck their speeder. The vehicle flipped midair. She and Ethan were thrown to the ground, rolling across the dirt as debris rained down around them. Pain shot through her body, but she forced herself up. The battlefield was already descending into chaos. Blaster fire, the clash of metal, the cries of the wounded. Ethan pulled her up. We need to move. But before they could, a familiar voice echoed across the battlefield. Tavari. She turned sharply. Kaler stood atop the command outpost, watching her with cold, unwavering eyes. This ends today, he declared. Face me, or your people will die. Silence fell over the battlefield. Tavari's hands tightened into fists. She had known this moment would come. A final battle, not just for survival, but for the future. She stepped forward. If I win, the rebels walk free. Kaler's lips curled into a smirk. If you win, princess, the Empire no longer deserves to stand. He drew his blade, a long, curved weapon of imperial design, humming with deadly energy. Tavari unsheathed her own. A fight for everything. Duel of honor. The battlefield fell silent as the two warriors circled each other. Kaler moved first. He lunged, his blade a flash of silver. Tavari barely dodged in time, the edge slicing through the air, just inches from her throat. She countered, a sharp, precise strike aimed at his ribs. Kaler deflected it effortlessly, using his momentum to twist around and slammed the hilt of his blade into her side. Tavari stumbled, pain shooting through her ribs. Kaler was faster than she remembered, stronger. But she had something he didn't. She had Ethan. From the sidelines, Ethan called out. He's baiting you. Stay defensive. Kaler scoffed. You take orders from a human now. Tavari smirked. Humans have a strange way of surviving. You should try it sometime. Kaler's eyes darkened. He attacked again, faster, more aggressive. Their blades clashed again and again, sparks flying. Each strike sent shockwaves through the ground. Strength against precision. Power against agility. Then, Kaler made a fatal mistake. He overextended. Tavari saw it, the small opening in his stance. She moved before he could react. Her blade slashed upward, cutting through his armor, grazing his shoulder. Kaler staggered back, gripping the wound. His breathing was heavy, his stance faltering. For the first time, Tavari saw doubt in his eyes. She raised her blade. Surrender. Kaler stared at her. Then, to her shock, he laughed. You think this ends with me, he said, voice dark. You think the Empire will bow to you. Tavari didn't hesitate. If I have to burn it down and rebuild it, I will. Kaler's smirk faded. Then, slowly, he dropped his blade. The battle was over. A new era begins. The battlefield was silent. Then, one by one, the Imperial forces lowered their weapons. The war was over. Tavari turned to Nyx and the rebel warriors. This is not just a victory for us. This is the beginning of something new. Nyx smirked. I'll drink to that. Ethan walked up beside her. So, what now, princess? Tavari glanced at the fallen Empire soldiers, the rebels standing victorious. Now, she took a deep breath. We rebuild. Ethan gave a lopsided grin. Sounds like a lot of work. Tavari smirked. Good thing I have a human to help me. Ethan chuckled. I knew you liked me. She rolled her eyes. Don't push your luck. As the sun rose over the battlefield, Taveri knew this was just the beginning. She had started as a princess. Now she would become something more. A leader, a warrior, a symbol of change. And perhaps, with a certain reckless human by her side, the galaxy's best hope for peace. A new era. The battle had ended, but the war was far from over. Taveri stood at the edge of the battlefield, the golden light of dawn spilling over the broken landscape. Smoke curled in lazy tendrils from the wreckage of the Imperial stronghold. The bodies of fallen soldiers, both rebel and Imperial, lay scattered across the scorched earth, a stark reminder of the cost of victory. She had defeated Kaler, forced the Imperial forces to stand down, and won the respect of the resistance. But now came the hardest part, rebuilding a world that had been broken for centuries. Ethan stood beside her, silent for once, his usual smirk replaced by a rare moment of reflection. He had fought battles before, seen wars start and end. But this was different. This was history in the making. Taveri took a deep breath and turned to the crowd of warriors before her. Zeltharian rebels, former Imperial soldiers, and scattered civilians who had survived the attack all watched her with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. Nick stepped forward, arms crossed. Well, princess, you won. What now? Taveri let the question hang in the air. What now? For the first time in her life, she wasn't following orders. She wasn't acting as an imperial princess bound by tradition. She was choosing her own path. She squared her shoulders. We take back control. We build something new. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some were hopeful. Others were wary. Nyx arched an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan to do that? The Empire may have lost here, but they still control most of the system. You think they'll just let you walk away with a rebellion? Taveri's gaze darkened. No, which is why we're going to change the game. She turned to the former Imperial soldiers. You have a choice. Stand with me, or return to an empire that abandoned you the moment you failed. Silence. Then, slowly, one soldier dropped his weapon. Then another. Then, one by one, they knelt before her. Taveri felt something shift in her chest. Not power, not authority, something greater, responsibility. She glanced at Ethan. You're quiet. Ethan smirked. Just enjoying the view. You, leading an army. Yeah, I saw that coming. She rolled her eyes. We're not an army. We're a movement. And we need allies. Nyx's lips quirked upward. I know just where to start. The return to the capital. 3 days later, they arrived at Zelthar Prime's capital city. The towering spires of the Imperial Palace loomed in the distance, their once majestic glow now dimmed by the weight of uncertainty. The streets were filled with citizens, some fearful, some hopeful, all watching as the rebels marched through the gates, led by their princess. The High Council was waiting. Taveri had not set foot in the Imperial Hall since the day of the failed peace talks. Now she walked through them, not as a pawn, but as a force to be reckoned with. The council chamber was vast, filled with the most powerful elders of her species. Their expressions were unreadable as she entered, but she could feel their discomfort. She was supposed to be dead. The High Chancellor, a withered but sharp-eyed Zeltharian elder, leaned forward. You have caused quite the disturbance, princess. Taveri met his gaze. I have exposed a lie. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Chancellor studied her for a long moment. You expect us to bow to a rebellion? No, Taveri said. I expect you to see reason. She stepped forward, voice steady. The Empire is crumbling. Your rule is no longer absolute. The people no longer trust you, and they shouldn't. You allowed corruption to fester. You allowed war when there was another way. And you tried to silence me for speaking the truth. A sharp silence followed. Then a laugh. And what do you propose, child? The Chancellor scoffed. That we simply hand you the throne. Taveri shook her head. No, I don't want your throne. I want something greater. She turned, gesturing toward Ithan. The council members bristled at the sight of the human, but Tivari continued. This war was never about humans versus Zeltharians. It was about control, fear, tradition that has held us back for centuries. The universe is changing. We can either change with it or be left behind. She let the words sink in. I will lead this world forward. Whether you stand with me or against me is your choice. But know this, if you choose war, we will fight. And this time, we will win. Silence. Then, one council member stood, then another. One by one, they bowed. The chancellor, still seated, narrowed his eyes. But he saw the inevitable. And then, finally, he nodded. Very well, he said. Let us see what future you can build, princess. The dawn of a new era. Days later, as the sun rose over Zelfar Prime, Tivari stood at the palace balcony, looking over the city. Her city. Below, people gathered, not as rebels or soldiers, but as a unified people. She had done it. She had changed the course of history. Ethan leaned beside her, arms crossed. So, you're in charge now. Tivari smirked. Something like that. Ethan chuckled. And what happens now? Tivari took a deep breath. Now we build something better. Ethan grinned. You're really bad at taking breaks. She laughed softly. I had a good teacher. He raised an eyebrow. Me? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back to the city. A new dawn was rising. And for the first time, in a long, long time, there was hope. Epilogue. The message across the stars. In the far reaches of space, a transmission flickered to life. A human admiral sat back in his chair, listening to the message. A message from the new ruler of Zelfar Prime. To the human alliance, Tivari's voice echoed. The war is over. We stand ready, not as enemies, but as allies. The admiral smirked. Interesting. He turned to his officers. Prepare a response. This could be the start of something big. And so, across the stars, a new story began.